D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to the Buzzball Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the GeneSys Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and this episode we have overclocked our rigs to burn through the ice, cut through the web of corrupt corporation red tape, and extracted the most important agenda of all, the rogue AI himself, Sam Gregor-Stewart, manager of all things RPG and the FFG headquarters root server. But before we get to those sultry tones of Sam on the podcast waves, let me introduce you to my netrunners in crime, GM Huzz and GM Flano. How are we both?
I'm doing quite well, knowing that Sam's going to be on the podcast.
Very cool. He's always welcome, and he's got a far better voice than all of us.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to those sultry tones.
Indeed. So, before we go any further, what's everybody been up to?
What have I been up to? That's the
Aristale.
I think the listeners are getting sick of hearing about that. Aristale, I've been doing actually a fair bit of work behind the scenes, setting up a Android campaign.
You have?
That's basically consumed my time between work in Aristale.
I am so looking forward to playing it.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. We kicked that off the day after we record this, so tomorrow, our time. So by the time you guys listen to this, we should have our first session under our belts. Last Sunday, a fortnight ago, we did session 0 after our last recording, which was a hefty 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. So 6 hours worth of session 0, and a lot of cool character backgrounds were established. I have a lot of information to go by, and I've still been getting character stuff from the players in that fortnight since then. So I'm very eager to get the first session going, because I've got a nice little simple adventure written up for you guys that'll
which will be hardly simple, I imagine.
Oh, of course not. Yeah, on paper it's simple, but I know how things go. But I didn't want anything too taxing, because I want everyone's characters to sort of get into the groove of things. So start establishing those plot threads. And build NPCs and etc. as we go. That's what I've been doing.
Indeed. Martin, what have you been up to?
Well, I played some Aristale,
of course.
but I've also been getting into, in some of my spare time, the Apex Legends.
Okay.
I've been playing a bit of that, because you can get in and out of a game in like 10, 20 minutes. Like,
right.
If you've got a moment, you can sit down and relax.
Quick fix.
Yeah, it's a quick fix.
Yeah.
Because I haven't really
until you play 200 games in a row.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's easy to do, but no, I haven't really had much time for things lately. So, being able to hop on the computer when I've got a spare moment and play a full game of something is relaxing.
Absolutely.
So,
as far as what I've been up to, I've been busily writing a adventure for Night's Edge, which will be running at Gamination Con, which will be kind of cool. We may or may not do that. I would suggest we probably will as a live play at a later stage. But that's been quite interesting, developing the lore, sort of tightening up some of the rules that we came up with for Night's Edge. And also working with Scott Zalwat, I think that's how I pronounce his name, for doing some artwork and prepping sort of character sheets and the module itself, which will be kind of cool. So, hopefully maybe down the track we might release that to the general public as well. But that's sort of what I've been up to, obviously playing in Huzz's his Android game, which is, as I said, I can't wait for that. But other than that, we've just been preparing for Gamination Con, which will be coming up towards the beginning of April, which requires us to fly across the great Pacific Ocean. That's the one I was looking for, to make it to Plano, Texas. So that'll be interesting. So hopefully we'll be able to see many of you who are fans of the podcast there, and we can have a discussion or answer your rules questions, or maybe even just have a game across the table with you all. So that'll be lots of fun.
Absolutely.
So, before we go any further, GM Flano, what's our podcast of the week?
Well, this week we spotlight Roll for Initiative. Join DM Vincent, DM Nick, and producer Matt as they talk about all things about the old classic but still much loved first edition Dungeons and Dragons. The dice they roll may not have any fancy symbols, but the adventures they go on are no less inspiring. And if you really like what they do, be sure to check out their Patreon page. You can check this podcast and many more on the D20 Radio Network at www.d20radio.com.
Very cool. It's been a long time since I've played first edition D&D.
Long.
I started in second edition AD&D.
Really?
So
Wow.
You old people.
As I've said before, we first made our own game system because we didn't have anything.
So
and then we did
your
second
street
edition.
role plays.
Yeah.
Hardcore gangsters, you.
No. We were under a threat of expulsion for playing these. It was street.
Well, I know. So that's what's so funny about that meme. You guys had a street RPG group. It's the best.
That was always a threat during the 80s to be basically thrown out of school because you were playing this demonic game called Dungeons and Dragons. But anyway, I didn't. I started with Top Secret and we still turned it into a dungeon grill. Anyway,
did you summon Satan by accident? And he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was D&D."
You're crazy. All right, so now last week we gave you an overview of Fantasy Flight Games' latest GeneSys offering, Shadow of the Beanstalk, and so we thought it would be only fair to bring on the man pulling all of the strings, Sam Stewart.
You forgot something.
What? Shh. It's all a ruse.
No, it's core of the show.
Oh. Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning the GeneSys Role Playing Game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, recently, Fantasy Flight Games released the much-anticipated role-playing game setting sourcebook, Android, Shadows of the Beanstalk, to much fanfare. Now, this is the second setting book and the first which delves into the world of cybernetics, corporate espionage, hacking, and all things cyberpunk. So we felt it was only fitting here on the podcast that we go straight to the source to answer your games and rules questions about this amazing tome. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the man, the myth, the legend, Sam Gregor-Stewart. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing, Sam?
Not too bad, not too bad. Hey, it's good to talk to you all.
Now, Sam, we've been dropping your name a lot in recent times, but for those who have been living under a spacious three-bedroom rock for the last 10 years or so, perhaps you could let us and our listeners know who you are and what you do there at FFG's corporate HQ skyscraper.
I'm afraid it's only a single-story building.
A man can dream, okay?
Right now the snow's halfway up the building, too, so...
Really?
Nice.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. It's real bad. No, but I'm the manager of the role-playing game department at Fantasy Flight Games. Been there for more than a decade now.
Wow.
And was the lead developer on GeneSys, got to work on Star Wars back in the day. And yeah, that's about it.
Cool. And can I just say, just from the outset, that Shadows of the Beanstalk is amazing.
Thanks.
I know that we were involved in the playtest side of things, and we had a lot to obviously discuss during that time. But the final product is just—it's a gorgeous book. It's got everything that anybody'd ever want to be able to run in the Android setting or any sort of cyberpunk setting. So yeah, well done.
I was only
Thanks, guys.
I was only saying last night to a mate who picked up a copy of the book that I think it's my favourite book FFG has done in terms of role playing. But then again, I'm probably extremely biased. So
because you love this Netrunner.
I do. It's great.
Very good.
Yeah. Well, hey, you all deserve a pat on your back as well for helping slog through all that testing. I know there's a lot of material and there's a lot of back and forth on stuff.
Absolutely. So, but yeah, I mean that's no problem at all. I mean that's part of the fun of being being a playtester, and you know, if anybody wants to become a playtester, they can't. Exactly. But yeah, they can go through the application process, which is available online. Is that right?
Yeah, you can reach out through the Asmodee website, I believe.
Yep.
And that would have the contact information for it. They're always looking for more playtesters, and just even though this is primarily about GeneSys and role playing games, I mean, we're always looking for playtesters for all our different role playing games. And I know they're looking for playtesters for all of our different games as well.
Because we did some stuff as well for Imperial Assault, which was a lot of fun as well.
You go.
So so it's and we've done a board game or two as well. So yeah, it's been good.
We're very busy.
Indeed. All right. Yeah. So we could wrap it on like this for hours.
I want to get my fingers into X-Wing. So that's what I want to do.
What about Legion?
Legion would be good. I've actually, I want my fingers in Legion and X-Wing.
Anyway, so moving along. So since we've got you here for the Q&A, Sam, we should probably get stuck into that. And we've got a lot of questions, so thank you to everyone who has sent us through some questions. We have a fairly, I didn't count them, but we've got 8 pages. So if we get through most of them, I think it'll be some type of record. So if this turns into a 3-hour podcast, I apologize. We don't have Sam for that long, but we'll see how much we can get through. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
It's probably worth mentioning before we get started, a lot of the questions we're asking about future releases.
Yeah. And
haven't been asked purely because Sam can't answer them.
Yeah, pretty much. So the normal process for Sam, as well as anybody who from FFG that comes onto the podcast, is that they can't comment on future releases. So if you did ask any questions about future releases, we do apologize. You're just going to have to be patient, and because the wait will be well worth it, I think. All right.
And I'll just say I'll extend my apologies as well. It's the way it is, but
don't worry. Off the air, Sam tells us all the juicy secrets.
Not.
We wish. We wish.
Just the stuff you're playtesting.
Exactly right. All right. So we'll start off with a Facebook question from Kyle Quigley. So what do you think makes Android, the Android setting, unique in comparison with other sci-fi worlds?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think one of the things that sets Android apart is it's not totally unique, but it's both the deep focus into science fiction detail, but also the focus on the artificial life, the concept of androids. That's plays such a big part of the setting, the whole question of what it means to be human and so forth. But one of the things that's particularly interesting about it is you have multiple examples of artificial life in this setting. So whereas some settings they'll have, humans, and then they'll have basically, your robot or your replicant or your whatever. And it's sort of a comparison between the two. In this setting, you have degrees. So you've got clones, you've got biroids. You can make the argument that a clone is more human than a biroid, but you could also potentially make the argument that a clone isn't a human because they have DNA mixed up with animals and as well as people. So I think like it gets into that question of what does it mean to be human a lot more than a lot of settings do, and that's fairly crucial at the center of it. At the same time, I know that we spend a lot of time trying to take the whole science element of things somewhat seriously. I mean, it's science fiction, so you can't. Not everything is true, and we've had to take some liberties to make the setting more interesting. But we've really tried not to get too crazy with a lot of the stuff we've done, and I think that lends this feeling of realism and solidness almost to the game. So when you're reading about the setting, especially as you get into the section on New Angeles and you really dive deep into it, a lot of those locations are what we were extrapolating or assuming might become locations in modern day Ecuador several hundred years from now. So it talks about like locations that are like these days like city squares and parks and stuff that have been covered over by buildings or turned into wildlife preserves or maybe flooded by the rising sea levels of oceans. But some of the names are still actually the same.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's that realism it's that sort of grounded realism that really makes it appeal to me.
Yeah.
Like you can go to real world locations almost that are completely alien in a way, which is great.
Well, I also love, how you raised that question of humanity. Is a gene mod or a cyborg still human? Are they more or less?
Well, it certainly makes for different sort of storytelling, definitely. You can start to question the human condition. Which, it's certainly moving away from that whole, kill the monster and take its stuff sort of mentality that some role-playing games do, or even if it's just a fantasy element. Bringing in, you can start to question those more adult sort of concepts, which can make for a brilliant sort of role-playing.
There's more morality plays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to start talking about like the games you can run in this setting, especially with Shadow of the Beanstalk specifically, which with its focus on New Angeles, writing adventures for it has really been interesting and part of that is because everyone's in a city, so the kill things and take their stuff option actually means that the police are going to potentially get involved. And at the same time, there's security cameras. It's not just like a town guard shows up. It's, there's a modern police force, and depending on how much noise you make, they could actually get interested in you to your detriment. There's also the elements of like these huge mega corporations and how much do you want to be on their radar? That's a really a part of this setting and this game that I find really fascinating, and sometimes all too reminiscent of the modern day world and what's going on around us. But it takes it and twists it just a little bit more. Like what if things were dialed up another few notches in like the corporate control of things and corporations are people too and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the next question comes from Facebook via Facebook by Corby Kennard. Now he asks, inspiration for this book comes from William Gibson's Neuromancer and Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. What are some of the more obscure inspirations or references that people may have not really acknowledged yet?
Yeah. So there's some of the really obscure, well, it ranges from very to less very obscure, but when Dan and Kevin first created the setting, one of the things they did was seeded in a lot of science fiction author names into various locations, especially on the moon. So besides, of course, the location being called Heinlein, the main settlement on the moon, you have things like the Harriman Dome and other locations like that. Although one of my favorite little name locations like that is actually I'm not going to pronounce this right, so bear with me. Tsuki no Miyako, which is it's a little subdome off of Tranquility Home, but it's a location from a Japanese myth about a character who travels to the moon to I think to wed the Queen of the Moon, I believe it was.
Oh, really?
Cool.
Yeah. So obviously it's so yeah, so there's like little things like that, but then as far as like some of the inspirations go, besides, yeah, you're right. Philip K. Dick and William Gibson are huge inspirations there. The movies to the movie versions of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, so Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, that was a big influence, especially because the visuals you got out of that are like a real inspiration for what a like mega city is going to really look like. Then, of course, Ghost in the Shell was a popular media for us, especially when it came to like representing the network and hacking and what that kind of interactions look like. There's some real world inspirations as well. Like when I wanted to know like some of the claustrophobic feelings of the Undercity, like you look up the Kowloon walled city. Have you never heard of that?
I've heard of it.
Okay, yeah. It's been torn down in years from now, but there was a great example of like just what a vertical living, like vertical slums basically must have been like, or could potentially be like.
I would love to go on there just to check it out. It's a shame it's gone. Like
it was dangerous to walk around.
I know. Like the idea of being able to cross one side of the city to the other and not ever touch the ground is amazing.
That's weird.
And there was waterfalls of water inside the crevasses and whatnot between the buildings from all the air conditioning condensation collecting and pooling and water falling down.
Yeah.
Wow.
And people could live, within a few meters without ever actually, like, for their entire life.
Yeah.
It
That's
was
nuts.
It was a closest example of a cyberpunk city we had on the living Earth today.
And what was the name of that city?
It's the Kowloon walled city. It was a territory between Hong Kong and the Chinese border back when Hong Kong was under British control.
Right.
I think it was like an unclaimed territory or something like that.
Yeah, it had no government essentially.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
So who was running it? Anyone?
I think it was gangs.
Sorry, what was that?
Gangs were running it.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah, there was black market surgeons and everything in there.
And so,
Wow.
and there was no restrictions as to how you could build, so people just built where they needed.
Yeah.
And it ended up, because you could be as close as you wanted to your neighbor.
Yeah.
It just ended up like basically building on top of each other.
It was a 40k hive city.
Yeah.
In like a small
Okay.
scale, essentially.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting to look at the history of that city and the implications for especially this game world.
Because, Michael, just very quickly, you showed us, was it you who showed us there was a novel which talks about Heinlein, which is
It's
moon,
the moon is a cruel mistress.
Oh, yeah. The moon is a harsh mistress.
That's the one. That's written by Heinlein.
Right.
And that's obviously the reference to Heinlein, and as Sam said
Yeah.
before, on
Yeah.
Luna.
Yeah.
But also a lot of the Luna stuff is very, very heavily inspired from the stuff in this book as well.
Right.
So if it's fun tip for those at home, if you're looking for a book to inspire you, read that book. It's a great book. It's like it was written in 1966.
Wow.
So it's quite old, but it's timeless. Like when you read it, you would never expect that it was written that long ago.
Okay.
It's very, very, very good.
I will have to invest in that, I think, just very quietly.
There was actually a book that has stuck with me when I read it as a kid, and it talked about a lot of it's more science space fantasy than science fiction, but it was written by Arthur C. Clarke, so it has that more high sci-fi tone to it, called Earthlight. And that's about a war between the outer colonies and Earth, and the moon is in the center of it. But a lot of it focuses around a observatory on the moon and just driving around and stuff. It wasn't really good, like, inspiration from the like technical standpoint, because, like I said, Arthur C. Clarke was more interested in sort of high concept and entertaining science fiction, but it sort of gave me this feel like it brought the idea of living on the moon to life, which was kind of cool.
So, we've got a question here.
From From us,
the Dice Pool podcast.
Good guys.
Well,
insightful questions.
Absolutely. So, with that in mind, the question reads, with the near overnight departure of the Netrunner IP, did Shadow of the Beanstalk shift from just being a GeneSys RPG setting in development to more of a safekeep for all that rich Android setting? A way to keep all that minutiae of the setting alive in a hefty tome that'll live on forever.
Well, I like to think it will live on forever. But no, it's actually Shadow of the Beanstalk was developed somewhat independently. Well, pretty independently of Netrunner, really. So the cancellation of the game line didn't really change much for what we were going to do with our game. The design of the book was figured out fairly early on, and we stuck with it. And it's also important just to remember just how much time it takes to develop one of these projects, and like take a book from start to finish. So we were working on this well before the Netrunner game line was canceled, and then also after the Netrunner game line was canceled. But yeah, that being said, one of our goals was to make this a valuable source of information for the setting, but also not to overlap too much with Worlds of Android. There's certainly some crossover, but Worlds of Android can get really deep into the minutia of the setting in some really interesting ways, and also covers like more than just New Angeles. So with this, we decided this was much more of a deep dive into what it's like to live in New Angeles or on Heinlein, and what adventures take place there. So it's much more focused, but it lets us kind of drill down into the details of the biggest city on Earth. Well, biggest city on any of the worlds.
Yeah, because World of Android is just an amazing book. And to reiterate something that Michael said, or has said in the last episode, a nice sort of box set of those two would be great. Because it's a great supplemental thing. I think that if you go out and buy Shadow of the Beanstalk, if you're wanting that next level approach, is to go and take a look at Worlds of Android. Because it allows for, as you say, Sam, it's got that much more in-depth sort of look to everything else. Yeah.
So I guess with Android coming out shortly after Netrunner went away, unfortunately, I guess it was sort of good timing, because unfortunately when a card game goes away, it sort of falls out of the public eye for a lot of people. And I guess, well, I feel anyway, that now that Android's around, it sort of keeps the pulse going. How I feel anyway. It keeps in the spotlight. Yeah, we have New Angeles and et cetera, or the other Android IPs. But it feels that Shadow of the Beanstalk is that more living sort of thing that people can continue on and expand on and live in that universe, sort of like they did in Netrunner. So I just personally, I think it's great because it does keep that sort of, keeps the lights on, essentially.
Well, and honestly, I can't argue with that at all. We certainly hope that's the case, because we really like the setting, and
that's great.
Hope that it gets a lot more mileage.
Yeah,
which I think it will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, Blake Thompson and Chad Gallagher also asked similar questions, so thanks, guys, for those questions. Unfortunately, Chad did ask in relation to whether there will be any support, and we're going to assume that Sam can't actually comment in relation to that. Would that be right, Sam?
That is correct, although we've mentioned before that we are still planning on releasing the Gen Con and PAX adventures that we did for Shadow of the Beanstalk.
Yep.
Nice. I can't say when that's going to be exactly, but that is something that we're planning on doing.
Yep.
And so keep your eye out for when that gets taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's nice to be able to get our hands on that sort of stuff, especially for those of us that can't actually be there.
Yeah, true. Very true. And we've Sam's been kind enough to give us a copy of Happy Hour, which we will be running in a live play. It may not be for a couple of weeks because we've got this Game in Action Con thing, which is going on will be out of sort of circulation for about 3 weeks. But definitely when we come back, we'll be making that available so people can give it a listen. Which, when it comes to live plays of things that do get released, it does make it easier for GMs and helps them to realize what some of the story points that they have to emphasize on and stuff like that. So thanks, Sam, for providing us with that.
For sure. Well, we really liked your live play of the Realms of Terranoth adventure. So
cool.
It was great fun too.
It was so long ago. All right, so Cole Quigley from Facebook says, which of the 2 setting books released thus far, the first being Realms of Terranoth, was more challenging to develop?
I would actually say it was Realms of Terranoth. Okay. So with Shadow of the Beanstalk, we had the Worlds of Android already existing, and that really was something that could serve as a touchstone for IP and lore. Mm-hmm. Some of the people who worked on Shadow of the Beanstalk also wrote for Worlds of Android, so they had that familiarity. And for anyone who didn't, we could just send them a copy of the book and say, it better match up with this, because this is our baseline for information. Realms of Terranoth was a lot more inventing from whole cloth, as it were, because we didn't have that IP book existing beforehand. So that was definitely part of it. It's also Realms of Terranoth was the first expansion for GeneSys. We're still figuring out how we wanted to do these things. GeneSys has always been an approach where we can, we're seeing how popular it is, what the reception is, and then going from there. So Realms of Terranoth was a bit of a learning experience. Very pleased with how it turned out, but it certainly took a little more work on the back end to get it to where it was.
Yeah. But no, I loved Realms of Terranoth because it was very much along the lines of this is the setting, and it sort of spelled out the world of Manara quite well. But if you just wanted to use it in a fantasy setting, you can do that as well. So I guess is that kind of the thing that you sort of aim for, so that you're going, well, this is the world that we're putting in this setting, but you can also use it for other stuff, so it's not as limiting.
Yeah, I would absolutely say you can use Shadow of the Beanstalk for other for non-Android science fiction games if you want. And we talk about that at the beginning of the book a little bit, just as we did with Realms of Terranoth too. So I definitely see this as if you're looking for sort of more that cyberpunk harder science fiction game with like the network and or whatever your version of the network is, and like corporations and intrigue and that sort of thing, then absolutely, I think there's a lot you can take out of this that will prove to be useful. And of course, it can also serve just as a good baseline. If you're inventing some stuff from cloth, it can be a good place to start. And then you're like, well, I want more lasers in my setting, and you can sort of extrapolate off from there or something. Or I want my setting to be on Mars. How's that going to change?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, definitely a useful source for anyone, I think, who wants to play science fiction.
Agreed. Yeah. And a number of people have suggested using Shadow of the Beanstalk in their sort of their not cyberpunk, their steampunk setting, because it's sort of like you can just reskin them. That was the word I was looking for. To reskin different sort of cybernetics and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I suppose you could do that. I hadn't even thought about that myself, but that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so next question comes from Darth Zog via email. Now he asks, what kind of efforts go into editing and compiling all the many writers, artwork, and stats to make a book like Android Shadow of the Beanstalk stay consistent?
Extensive. I mean, there's a reason these. There's definitely a reason that these books can take as much as a year or two from start to finish to create. Ideally less, but sometimes it goes for that long. What kind of efforts? There's the writers. It's a number of different freelancers who are all working together to generate stuff. We have a book plan that they're working towards. People work together on our own internal forums where they can communicate with one another. But even no matter what, when you have a bunch of different people writing something, there's always going to be some disconnect between different sections. And in some cases, like the chapter on New Angeles is huge, and we couldn't just give it to one person because it would have taken them like 5 months to just write, and I wouldn't have blamed them for taking that long. So that was work between 3 different people. That was Lisa Farrell, Monty Lynn, and Sterling Hershey, and so they wrote theirs. They were working with one another, comparing their work, but in the end, there were always going to be these little subtle differences. And then that was the job of myself and Christine Crabb, our editor, to go in and smooth that out, and try to make that much more coherent. Like, so that, I mean, ideally, when you're reading that section, you can't actually tell when one writer's section stops and another writer's sections begin. That's the goal, right? So that's just in the writing and editing phase. And editing is, of course, another huge amount of work. Meanwhile, we're trying to get the art made. That goes out to our great art team and their freelance artists. The graphic design's working on things. Yeah, Jude, I could probably just keep going on.
Go on for hours. Yeah, there certainly seems to be a lot of moving parts and things like that with developing the book. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I guess just to give you an idea, I mean, you can sort of see it on the credits page, but sometimes it doesn't sink in. Internally, we're working with, there's about 6 to 8 people that have their hands in it. And that's just internally. Our external, like the freelancers who are involved, there's maybe 10 to 12 editors, proofreaders, and writers, and dozens of freelance artists. So
yeah, just that list of freelance artists alone is just insane.
It gets up there pretty fast.
And then there's the playtesting. And look, we mentioned...
And I didn't mention the playtesting, but I should, because you're right. You guys have can have a really hard time of it, because you can be ending up with sections of the book that are getting rewritten on our end. Sometimes those rewrites can happen pretty late, and we're asking you to tell us if this makes sense or not.
Yep.
You're basically having to take our manuscripts that we don't always have time to update all the time, and interpret as best you can, and also take things very literally. It's a trait I admire in playtesters, when a playtester can look at the manuscript or look at the rule set and be like, all right, I played it as it was written, and here's all the things went wrong. I think what you meant was this, but I but I didn't assume. I like that like willingness to just charge into a situation or a rule set that just doesn't work, and then come back and say, so that didn't work. Here's all the reasons it didn't work. And what do you want to do now with this? It's honestly super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a lot of fun to see some of the the ideas that have been raised during the playtest, whether it be by us or other playtesters that have made it into the book. It's a real it's a bit of a buzz.
I'm glad.
So yeah. All right. So we've talked a lot about the development of the book, and yeah, as you say, we could talk about how these books get from idea stage all the way through to the final product. But that would probably be another entire show altogether. So let's move over to artwork, because I think artwork in this book is just, it's second to none.
As always.
As always. But I think I agree with Mike. It's is probably one of my favorite artwork, one of my favorite books with the type of artwork and the layout and everything else that you guys have done. So yeah. But other than the images for the careers, which are, obviously, not necessarily from some of the product that has been done for Netrunner, what was your favorite piece of artwork that you had commissioned for the book?
Commissioned. Okay. So not counting the careers, the pieces of art that we had, out of the ones we had commissioned, I would say two pieces, page 206 and page 248. So page 206 is the woman and the girl who are in space watching the starships dock with the Challenger planetoid.
Right.
And I really liked it because in the original Worlds of Android, you have one scene of the Challenger planetoid, and that's it. And you don't really get a whole lot more sense of what it looks like, but the concept of this asteroid space station and really getting to explore it and what does the anchor to the Beanstalk really look like? I mean, super interesting to me. I'm just nut for science fiction. So getting a different view of that was really cool. And then the other one was on page 248, and that's the PI investigating the murder victim. And that one's just because of the story that's involved with it. You have the Hardbin PI who's found this victim with a fancy knife stabbed in their back. The client who's called her in is freaking out in the corner. Everything looks super noir, but at the same time, there's these like high-tech scanners going around. The PI's got an artificial eye. All this all this like high-tech stuff in addition, and that juxtaposition between noir and high-tech kind of makes the tone of the Android setting for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much so.
All right, so I guess we talked about commissioned artwork, but Sam, do you have a favorite piece of artwork in the book that you like personally?
Well, I do, but actually my favorite piece of artwork is still commissioned.
There you go.
So one of the things about the career artwork is, well, a few of them are taken from the Android, from the Netrunner game. A lot of them actually were newly commissioned for the book as well, especially once you got into the careers. But like the archetypes, the Looney and the clone were both newly commissioned. And then in the careers, everyone but the soldier and the runner is new as well.
Wow.
And what was awesome about it was that Matt Zallinger, who did all of those old personality art for Netrunner, and so did the ones we used for the careers and the archetypes, we were able to get him happily to come back in and do all of the extra career art and archetype art as well. So we're super excited with how that turned out. So my favorite piece is actually the Roughneck career art, the space construction worker with the 2 PhDs and a solid grasp of orbital mechanics. That you can find that one on page 38.
Yep.
Yeah, he's badass.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
So yeah, and that one was one of the new ones, and I thought, honestly, one of my favorites. I mean, I love all of the career artwork, though, the new stuff, the old stuff. But that one's probably, if I had to pick one, my favorite.
Very cool. I still like the runner.
Well, who doesn't like chaos theory?
That's right.
And we'd also like to ask, is the image of the reporter on page 225 inspired by Rick Astley? In Australia, the term rolled is used when someone is mugged. Was it the intention to have this character rickrolled?
So believe it or not, no.
No! See, I thought that was going to be a thing.
Well, so actually, that is a picture of a former member of the role-playing game department and current senior manager of digital development, Andrew Fisher.
Oh,
sweet.
That's at Fantasy Flight. We have a tradition of if you work for 5 years, you get a piece of art commissioned in your likeness in a setting of your choice. That's his 5-year art piece.
And it is too.
I was wondering, if we had any of those in the book, and I was going to ask that, but now we know.
I know.
Well, you can, and it's not the only one. There's actually a few in there. Some of them more obvious, some of them less. Actually, at risk of spoiling the magic, I will say that on page 15, that is actually the graphic designer who designed the layout and look and appearance of Shadow of the Beanstalk, Chris Beck.
Right.
And page 19, that's Ryan Thompson. He's our head of photography and filming in the studio. So he does a lot of the promo videos you see for Fantasy Flight games. And there's some other people as well. I won't run through all of them. No. I just grab those two.
So that was the one that you were talking about. That's on the motorbike. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one.
There you go. He's got a doppelganger.
I do. I love that book though. That picture.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's cool. I didn't even pick up on the whole penguin at the front until you guys pointed it out last time. That was just wow. That's cool. Very, very good. All right, so we've talked about artwork, and there's a lot to talk about there. Again, we could go on for hours. So let's actually talk about a little bit about the lore of Android. So the first question comes from Larry Haskell, and I'll have to admit this part escapes me. But did Wizard survive the boom?
Well, I'd say there have been many people claiming to be Wizard since then, or claiming to know Wizard survived, or claiming to know Wizard died.
Right.
But afraid I can't tell you whether any of or all of them are lying. So that's a good question.
Disappointing for Larry, but that's okay.
It's a big old yes, no, maybe.
My answer there is it's whatever you want it to be.
Oh, good call.
Well, for somebody who spends all their time on the network, that can be really hard to tell. Some of the greatest runners of all time, people assumed they were dead, assumed they ran into their ghosts on the network, and then later found out they had simply faked their own deaths so that they could avoid vengeance by a dangerous corporation.
Right. I so need to get more into the lore of this. This is just amazing.
You do. Now, Zachary Gaskins asks via Facebook, is the Trimath just referencing the Sicilian, Russian, and Balkan unification, or a catch-all for all crime syndicates that aren't Los Scorpiones?
That's a good question, and the answer is it's the first. It's just the old mafias that are all united onto one banner. So Sicilians, the Russians, the Balkans, all that. There's a lot more org crime groups out there than just the Trimath. 14K being, of course, one of the other big ones, and the Yakuza are also a org crime group.
My personal favorite.
And I believe our upcoming Android game has the players very, very heavily indebted into all three org crimes somehow.
That'd be my character.
Everyone else's. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because the party's going to be torn at the edges by different crime groups. Yeah.
And the nightclub they run is both owned by the 14K and Trimath somehow.
Yeah.
Oh, best of luck to you guys.
Yeah, I'm the manager, Sam, so yeah, that's going to be fun.
They owe money to the 14K, because they gave them the money to set the nightclub up.
Right.
The turf war came up, and the Trimath claimed ownership, so they had to pay lease to Trimath and pay off debt to 14K.
Yeah. Because that's not going to clash at all. No.
Do both groups know about this?
They do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
it's not amicable, but it's heavily seeded into the fluff we've written up so far. So it's interesting.
Well, yeah,
it's not amicable, but it's accepted for now.
For now,
until that changes. and secretly, my character is the hired assassin that your character Ian used to take over the nightclub from its previous owner, and I work for the Yakuza.
Right.
Wait, was the previous owner Los Scorpiones? Just
well, what was his name? It was Gomez, wasn't it?
Gomez.
It is now.
No, I'm pretty sure it is Gomez. So.
Oh dear God!
It's got a real melting pot going on.
Well, New Angeles, it's the cultural center of the world.
Yep.
And these guys don't even know about the corporate identity who visits the club all the time. I haven't revealed that to them yet.
Yes.
So I randomly picked one NPC card from my my adversary deck to generate which random NPC visits the club every so often.
Really?
The results will surprise you.
Oh dear.
Sounds like one of those BuzzFeed polls.
The red circle around and the big arrow.
Something completely irrelevant.
Oh dear.
So, from Facebook, Kyle Quigley asks, Android has a huge amount of established lore. How did you decide what to include or exclude in this sourcebook?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's where the focus really became important. So, like I said, early on, we decided to focus more on New Angeles and that location in particular, because if we had tried to cover the entire setting, I mean, we'd probably be looking at a book that's more encyclopedic in length. But it really came down to the kinds of stories we wanted to tell for Shadow the Beanstalk specifically was relatively small-time people caught up in events and in the struggles between organizations that are way bigger than they are. Actually, a lot like what you're describing for your adventure. And because of that, we knew that what we needed to focus on was New Angeles itself, like what the city's like, and specifically what it's like for regular people. That's one of the inspirations behind the section in the chapter on New Angeles that talks about a specific city block, because even when we started expanding on the districts, the problem we were still having was it was still too broad. You could talk about an interesting location, but then you sort of remembered that like each of these districts has millions of people living in it. Each district is like a New York City or more. And so for every interesting location you described, there are hundreds of locations. So we drilled down a lot deeper into a single city block in Bay State Cayambe, and so we could say like, yeah, this isn't what it's like everywhere, but this sort of gives you much more of an idea of the day-to-day life. And so that focus, that desire for everyday people in extraordinary situations who have to learn to be extraordinary to survive, that helped basically guide what was going to go in and what was going to go out. So, it's not really much on Mars. There's not a ton on Kampala. We don't explore Neo-Tokyo or Boswash or anything like that. It's just New Angeles.
And because Heinlein is technically a district of New Angeles, for those listening at home, so that's why it's sort of included in the New Angeles book.
To eternal anger of everyone who lives in Heinlein.
Oh, I know. my character is a loony, so
Right.
But
there you go.
That was one of my favorite things about the book was the example block that's given in the base day Cambay district, and that sort of serves as good inspiration for the GM to sort of focus in and make their own world within the Netrunner world, I guess. And that's what we're doing with our game. I've created our own block, and slowly we'll expand upon that as we play with locations and etc. and build upon it. And because, as Sam said, it's one block and district contains millions of people, so it's endless of what you can do, especially considering the city goes up and down. So it's endless.
Yep,
Very
100
cool.
stories up, 100 stories down,
That's it.
or much more.
All right, so Darth Zog from Facebook asks, what are some considerations that go into selection of the criminal organisations included in the book? How was their flavour chosen? Any real-life inspirations mentioned by the writers?
Yeah, so we're pretty upfront with some of the real-world inspirations that go into the criminal organizations. I mean, there is an actual mafia, mafias out there now. Los Scorpiones comes a lot out of Colombian, Mexican, the drug cartels and South American drug cartels. 14K is played off of real life Chinese triads, and the Yakuza is, the Yakuza, the Yakuza, yeah. We wanted to. We had to assume that there would be some changes in hundreds of years from how these organizations functioned, but at the same time, we wanted people, when you hear the Yakuza or the Mafia, you have an image in your head of what that's like, and we didn't want to completely invalidate that either, because that's valuable. We don't want to be like, no. You see, this gang is completely different, and they only trade in sand, and they believe in extortion through anarchist free market principle. We didn't want to have to spend all this time explaining like gang philosophy or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, we picked things that were very iconic that would resonate with people, and then change them slightly or define them slightly more so that they felt like they fit into the setting.
Absolutely. Cool.
All right. I'm not going to try to pronounce this name. Is it Zig? I'm not sure. It's ZSIG, so Zig from the FFG forums. He asks, or she, when you run a game using the setting, what's the year and date you use as a present day? What is the reason for not including the date in the book?
Yeah, it's a good question and totally reasonable, but basically the answer is when you pick a specific date, it puts you on a deadline.
Yeah.
When the fiction inevitably doesn't match up with real life, it makes the whole setting feel less possible. So, you take something like Blade Runner, for example, since we were talking about it before. I'm trying to remember when Blade Runner the original Blade Runner was supposed to take place.
2019.
2019. Yeah. Okay. So sorry guys. I guess it's just not happening.
Where's my flight card?
Yeah, to my eternal disappointment.
But how Blade Runner 2049
I
handled
don't
it.
feel super terrible about some of the things in Blade Runner not coming to pass, but that's just me. But yeah, so we didn't set a specific date because it's tomorrow. It's it's however far ahead it needs to be for climate change to have come and sort of stabilized so that people can live with it, for us to develop the technology it takes to build a space elevator, invent helium-3 fusion, figure out how to map the human brain to the point where we can make artificial versions of it, and to start seriously colonizing Mars to the point where it's another planet with a culture that's sort of growing out from itself. And maybe that's 2079, maybe that's 2179, maybe that's 2279. And I say 79 because we do give a date. We give it's something 79, and we're never going to specifically say what it is. It might have moved up to 85 now, but in any case, we give you a year. We don't give you a century.
Yep. And I think that's a really unique and intelligent way of doing it, because otherwise you'll get those wars that happen online where people sort of start talking about continuity and start pushing their glasses up to
Are you telling me people argue online?
Where have you been?
There you go.
Because that never happens. Oh. Never. Ever. No. But anyway.
No, it's a smart way of doing it. Like, as Sam just said, it always pushes that date forwards to the convenient time where it needs to be convenient.
Yeah. And I mean, if you've got your own internal date system that you want to have for your own game anyway, why be limited? No. It doesn't need to be, It's not as though that Sam's going to come knocking on your door at your house and say,
he might.
Dude, you can't do that.
Well, if you set your game in 2179 and your campaign continues to the year 2180 and it's not relevant anymore, then kudos for running a 100+ year game.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I want to know what your characters are like.
I know, right? that XP curve.
Yeah.
The game timeline doesn't progress more than a year.
Yeah, right.
It's like The Simpsons.
I mean, but everyone's playing as brains in jars plugged into a server at that point.
Sounds great.
Talking about playing characters, let's talk about character generation, and we've got quite a few questions in relation to that. But our first one comes from Chellis on the FFG forums, who says, was wondering about the design choice of giving naturals 120 XP versus the normal human archetype from the core rules of 110. He said he realizes that archetypes do not always have to balance across settings, so long as they do balance within the game setting itself. Did you feel that the general starting XP was too low, and that's the reason why you've increased it to 120?
That was the reason, specifically for the natural, as opposed to the average human in the GeneSys core book. And a big part of that was that the natural was really the one archetype that hadn't really changed rules wise from anything we did in the core book. And we started comparing it to some of the stuff we were doing with archetypes like especially the later versions of the Gmod and the Cyborg. We had the Biroid and the Clone. The Biroid also went up in experience. So did the Clone from what they were in GeneSys core book. And the Clone got a new, better ability after some extensive playtester feedback, which we appreciated. But all of this stuff that was happening, we saw their abilities just improving a lot more, and compared the something like Resourceful, where the Looney gets an ability to reroll any 2 dice in a die pool once per session. That's really powerful. It's really good.
Because it can be a despair, you can reroll. Yes.
Say what?
It can be a despair, you can reroll. So it's very, very handy.
It's any too. Yeah. You can reroll those challenge dice. That's or the Gmod's enhanced genetic modification, where they can add a whole bunch beyond their Gmods, add a whole bunch more successes to a check. Like, that can often just be the difference between success and failure on a critical check.
Yeah.
All that, naturals and average humans are a really interesting place because they're ready for anything ability, helps fuel everyone else's abilities, but it doesn't quite give them the same chance to shine in the spotlight that some of these other characters have. They're just the workhorse characters. They just have a lot of XP, and they're customizable and cool. So giving them the extra 10 XP we felt was necessary to help really reinforce that idea of, you can play the flashy character. And believe me, we know everyone wants to play the flashy characters because you're playing an android.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're going to just play a regular person, then here's a little something extra for you.
Which is cool because it's, as you said, it's very enticing to play the flashy characters. But a couple of those flashy characters, bioroids and clones, for example, if the GM is very aware of the setting, you can struggle playing those characters. So in terms of how they get along with the people in the world. So if you had a party full of clones and bioroids, you could have a party that constantly gets, harassed by everyone because they're not seen as humans, and getting through society with a party just made of that could be tricky.
And hunted. Because they're property.
That's right. And
someone just says, you're mine now.
Yeah. Just having the flats a little bit more tantalizing in choice with 10 extra XP is a great incentive to just go, I might play a normal person and be quite mutable in what you can do in terms of your stats and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very cool. Speaking of loonies, Darth Zog also asks, with regards to that, the ability to be able to re-roll, is that for any dice that are in the dice pool, or is it only for your skill dice?
Oh, it's any dice.
Nice.
I said it was good. It's good.
It is good. That's just insane. So those despairs, bye-bye.
Yeah, because I know the Looney during the playtest didn't have this ability. And when I read the book, I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool. But my initial read over, I just assumed yellow and green dice. I don't know why. But then I read it again, I'm like, wait.
It doesn't say.
Any dice.
Yeah.
That's really, really good.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's very good. Very, very good.
So, looking at careers, we've got a question here via email by one of our listeners, Edward Kelly. Because GM Huzz challenged us to ask, the useful talent sidebar that is included with each career is very helpful, but it was an element not included in Realms of Terranoth. Was this idea suggested by playtesters, something that came from fan feedback after the release of Realms of Terranoth, or an in-house idea that you felt would be good to include in this book?
That is a good question. And now that I'm thinking about it, I honestly can't remember if the idea first came about from the playtesters or it first came about in-house. I think it was in-house, and if it was something the playtesters suggested that I forgot about, then I apologize in advance. But I think it's also one of those ideas that can rattle around for a bit before finding purchase. But it's kind of obvious in hindsight. But it was something that got developed after Realms of Terranoth was completed, obviously, and it was something that we felt like could help make the careers more of a solid thing, not just based on skills. I mean, it's nothing official, but Realms of Terranoth was the first place we had this idea of starting gear, and then with Shadow the Beanstalk, it was like, oh, and we could also do like suggested talents. And I think we just thought like, hey, we're not forcing anyone into anything, but since the talent pyramid can be a little intimidating for somebody who has that attitude of like, oh my God, I could choose any talent from 2 different books. Where do I start? Especially a new player. Be like, hey, why don't you start here? Here's a few ideas. You probably won't regret it.
And it just sort of makes the careers more solid as a thing. And I really like that.
I agree.
Gives you a shove in the right direction if you're stuck.
That's right. And if you've never ever played role-playing games before, and I think that there will be with a setting like Android where Netrunner was such a popular game,
established fan base,
that you've got an established fan base, they'll be going, can I actually play in this sort of environment? That'd be kind of cool. I've never been into role-playing, and I mean, I hope this is how it goes. And then people can go, right, well, as you say, Sam, I've got all this choice. What do I do? Then, just that helpful hint. And, of course, if nobody in-house wants to take credit for it, we can.
We'll say it's an idea that came out of the Gestalt people who worked on it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Alrighty, so another question via the FFG forums by Noah Jam. Now they ask, a lot of the equipment packages for each career come to less than 1,000 credits. Is this intended, and would it be appropriate to give additional funds to the shortchanged players?
Yeah, it's a totally reasonable question. And one of the things about the equipment packages is that they were sort of like the this idea of suggested talents. The equipment packages are like, hey, I don't know where to start. Where should I start? Here, and we say, here's a few things as your career, you're probably going to want to have. It's supposed to be very simple, very direct. Just choose this or this or this. Really good armor or really good gun. Do you want an offense or defense? Do you want to be a medic, or do you want to be more of a person who has access to the network and can poke around on that? But one of the elements of that was that we only wanted each set of equipment choices to have a certain number of choices, and also depending on what choices people made, you would end up with a different amount of money spent on gear. So because different choices cost different things. So you pick option A, you're at 100 credits worth of gear. You pick option B, you're at 200 credits, and that can compound as you go down. So we knew sort of what the maximum, like if you made all the right choices was going to come out to be, but we didn't know for sure. All that is by way of saying you absolutely can give your players extra cash to make up the difference, because really another way of looking at it is the suggested starting gear options is no different than if you're buying the gear yourself, because none of the gear you can get is something that you normally be that normally we gatekeep away from you. It's all in the starting chapter. It's all here. Here are your options. So you can recreate any of those gear choices just by taking the 1,000 credits and going down the list. Yep. So absolutely, if somebody takes that as inspiration, but then it's like, I should have, math it out. I should have an extra 175 credits, and I feel I deserve that. By all means, give that to your players. The other thing that's worth noting is that because you can start out with favors and get more money or more experience, we didn't take that more money into account with the starting gear packages either. So and honestly, we couldn't really do that without things getting really complex, which is the opposite of the goal.
Exactly.
So give them the extra money. I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Cool. So from the FFG forums, Arslane asks, on page 32 under the academic career, it lists portable comlink under starting gear. Should this be personal comlink?
Yes, it should be.
I like those short questions. They're great.
Opposed to non-portable comlinks.
Yeah, the ones that's commonly called what? A telephone box? Anyway. Yeah. Right. Yeah. All right, so Noah Jam also asks, again, from the FFG forums, he says, listed under the suggested talents for some of the careers, it suggests the talents that grant a career skill and a small favour from a faction. The career skills granted are already known by the career it's suggested for them a lot of the time. Would it be okay to substitute the career skill offered or give more choices when choosing the base talent?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that those are just that, right? They're suggested. Yeah. And we actually were very much aware of it when we put together this list of suggested talents and had kind of that like soul searching, like, well, we're giving them this talent that's going to give you a choice between two career skills you already have for this career. Does that make sense? And in the end, what we realized was the choices between the two talents for something like Years on the Force or Veterans of the World's War the choice between the two careers, where they were two careers that really made sense for that for like somebody who is in that situation. So, for example, veteran of the World's War, or World's War vet, sorry. Ranged heavy or resilience. That's like, yep, those are definitely skills you would expect someone who had been in the military to have. They also don't double up with some of the other talents that we've done. Cool. And so that was important that those choices were there. On the other hand, we didn't want to take away career skills from the soldier, for example, with the assumption of, oh, you'll just take this tier 5 talent to make up for it. We wanted it to stand on its own because you could have veterans of the World War veterans who are not soldiers. You know, they go into a different career, and you can have soldiers who are not World War veterans. They're like maybe they're mafia, soldiers, quote unquote, or maybe they didn't fight in the war. But long and the short of it was, we couldn't see any way around thematically of not having those pairings on occasion. Yeah. But at the same time, we knew that these talents were going to be something that sometimes a career would want to take because it was thematically appropriate. And to be perfectly honest, we see the value of those talents much more in the small favor aspect
absolutely,
than we do in the career skills.
Yeah. Because that was going to be my point, is that, don't take any value away from doing that once per session, because that can add so much storyline to it and just the ability to be able to get money out of the process. That's amazing.
Yeah.
These are my choice of favorite talents in a game, because I love the favors system. And I just love anything that allows you to play around with that is amazing on its own.
Agreed. Okay, so let's talk skills. Huzz, would you like to take us on the first question?
The next question, it comes from us, the Dice Pool podcast. How did you reach the decision of choosing to include only 3 knowledge skills? How did you reach that decision? Would you only suggest 3 to 4 knowledge skills for a setting, or will that depend greatly on the setting itself?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's another thing we wrestled with a little bit, and it's something that definitely does depend on the setting to an extent, I would say. In this particular case, I had been doing some testing in my own GeneSys game where it was a science fiction setting that I was testing out a lot of what went into Shadow the Beanstalk, but with some other stuff as well. But one of the things I was testing out was like, how many knowledge skills is too much and how much is too little? And I had settled on 3 for that particular setting because it felt like there was enough diversity in the knowledge skills that it wasn't just a general knowledge skill, but it didn't feel like any of my players were being forced to spread too thin to the point where, I'm investing in knowledge, fine dining, and great, that's 5 XP I'll never get back in my life. Which is definitely the trick of especially knowledge skills, is because you make them too broad. And everyone just puts 2 points into your broad knowledge skill and it calls it a day. Yeah. And there's never any kind of like differentiation between characters. You make it too narrow and nobody wants to invest in them. So 3 for this setting, or at least 3 for Shadow the Beanstalk felt right. Yeah. Like, I think that you could do more knowledge skills in the Android setting potentially. Like, if you were playing on Mars, you'd probably want a like knowledge Mars skill. If you were dealing with a much more military themed campaign, I could see like a knowledge warfare style skill as well. So things like that, but that didn't feel as important for this book. It just ended up feeling about right. And sometimes it's on sort of gut as much as it is on anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where setback dice and boost dice can come in handy. If you feel the knowledge is something obscure that wouldn't necessarily fall under social, you could chuck some setback onto it.
Yeah, or doesn't suit that particular character based on their backstory and stuff like that. Yeah. Or even in the alternate way, you could say that boost die, because if you're talking about somebody who's more in the military, like a soldier or whatever else, that they want to know something that they can, get a boost die for that.
Or a social skill, a social check for a social check regarding the moon that a loony makes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Give them a boost dice.
Definitely.
As a small side note on it, one error that made it into the book was one of our characters had knowledge of facts, which was, which obviously was wrong, but was also the shorthand that I was using in my own playtest. Yep. Just because I was, sometimes when you're testing things, you just get a little sardonic about it. So science was okay, now we need to come up with a serious name, not just knowledge facts, guys.
Well, I like that. I might have to do that for a setting. So,
be my guest.
But I mean, that's the other thing as well. When you're designing your own setting, this is what the open-endedness of this system allows. If you want to put it in. As long as you've got agreements from the table that this is the way that we're going to do something, put it in that way. It's not as though that Sam's going to come and knocking on your door with the big stick to go, I'm sorry, that's not in the Android book. You can't do that.
Sam, you have to do that at least once.
Yeah.
Just walk up to someone's door.
Well, any listeners who live in the Twin Cities, Minnesota area, you've been warned. I'm just not going to
watch out.
Very far. I'm so lazy.
Oh, dear. Very good. Okay, so that's a good discussion on skills. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest things with GeneSys, which are the talents. Now, Flano, would you like to read our first question?
Sean Cardell asks, can a PC operate a minion group of drones without the talent Drone Master, which is tier 5? If so, is there any limits? Also, a comment to pass along. Love the content in Shadow of the Beanstalk. Have a great time so far creating servers, encounters, custom vehicles, and NPCs.
Well, awesome, Sean. Thank you. As to your question, so you can control you can have sort of under your control theoretically any number of drones as long as your GM's fine with it. But how many drones you can actually direct at once through maneuvers and actions and so forth is another question. And in this particular case, I'm afraid that if you want to control a whole minion group of drones, you do need the Drone Master talent. The Animal Companion talent reflavored for drones would give you a single drone minion that you could direct with an action and a maneuver, or, by spending a maneuver to give it an action and a maneuver. And if you wanted the whole group, you would unfortunately need the Drone Master talent for that. Now, you could have multiple drone minions sort of operating on standby mode. We talk a bit in the Adversary chapter about what can drones do under your control, and you can always tell it to sort of do these drones to do very simple narrative things. So if you had a cam drone and a combat drone, you could take control of the cam drone and just have the combat drone on. If somebody comes around this corner, shoot them, and then leave the cam drone on. Let me know if somebody's coming after me. Switch control over the combat drone and then start directing that, for example. But not at once.
All right, so Groggy Gollum, that's a cool name, from the FFG forums. He says, I'm in need of some clarification on the Nimble talent. As written, it reads, at the start of your character's turn, you may spend 1 story point to use this talent to allow your character to perform a move maneuver as an incidental. Now, this does not count against the limit of 2 maneuvers per turn. If you use this talent, your character can only perform 1 additional move maneuver during this turn. I'm breaking it down sentence by sentence, and what it seems to say is that I can still take my 2 maneuvers on my turn after the incidental, but only one of those can be specifically a move maneuver. The other would have to be like a guarded stance, accessing an item, or the aim maneuver. Is that right?
That is. You got it exactly right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Not so groggy Gollum.
Yeah. Not so groggy after
So
all.
he's now a sober Gollum.
He's functioning.
But hey, that makes that particular talent amazing.
It's good talent.
Absolutely. It's great. Because that talent was also in Star Wars as well.
No, it wasn't the playtest for this, though. That's why I'm remembering it.
Right.
It did come up in our playtest, I'm pretty sure.
There you go.
It's all a blur. Jeremy Thompson, he asks, Bodyguard is listed as a Tier 3 talent, but says Tier 2. Is that a typo or misplaced?
It's just a typo, I'm afraid. It's a Tier 3 talent.
There you go.
Oh, sorry, Jeremy. All right.
Now, this one's close to my heart. GM Phil asks, was the exclamation point in parkour a nod to Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files, for those that don't know?
I'm sure that I don't know what he's talking about.
For copyright reasons, that's the reason why.
I always see it as hardcore parkour from The Office. That's me personally.
There's so many different places that it could
There's
come
that
from.
too.
Well,
I mean,
But no, like if anyone hasn't read the Dresden Files, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly right.
not reading them.
Right.
Accurate.
I did enjoy reading Skin Game. That was really good.
Yes.
All right. So Darth Zorg via email asks, what was your favorite talent and why?
Let's see. Favorite talent.
There are so many of them there.
Yeah, why not ask me to pick my favorite art and I'll here. No, there's a few I liked, so I don't know if I could just pick one.
Yeah, I had the same problem.
I really enjoyed coming up with Hold or Steady because or Hold It Steady, I think. Is that what we called it? Yeah, it is. Hold It Steady. Just because autofire is one of those things that any long-term fans of GeneSys know has gone back and forth as like super good, super like super bad, super good, super bad, and I felt like this creates a situation where it's like good, but there's also more of the trade-off that I really wanted. So I was a fan of that. But other than that, if I had to pick one other, probably Bad Habit.
Yes. It's a good one.
You become disoriented for the remainder of the encounter, and during each turn, as long as you're disoriented, you heal 2 strain. I don't know what exactly you're doing. That's between you and your character, what your character's doing. But whatever it is, it's relaxing you. maybe it's those e-cigarettes. Maybe it's a flask. Maybe it's something a little stronger. But
that sounds like from Legend of the Five Rings. That sounds like engaging one of your passions.
Yes.
Yes. Very good.
But, yeah.
And I know that in the last episode, we didn't actually talk about what our favourite talents were. I had a look through, and I'm like you, Sam. I couldn't make a decision which one exactly, but I had 2.
No. You got to pick one. We've all picked one. We've all picked one.
You're not my real mum. You can't tell me what to do.
But I'm your real dad.
That's disturbing on a few levels, but anyway.
Time travel.
Wow. Jeez. Okay. So I'm not going to. I refuse. I'm a nonconformist. So I would suggest that Snare was my all-time favourite, but followed closely by Master Plan. I love Master Plan. That is basically like, right, I'm really lost as to what's going on. Please tell me. So yeah, Michael, that's the direction I'm heading. So with my character, but no, Snare is amazing. In fact, there's a lot of good running talents, which have made it into the book. And so yeah, it does make running just that little bit more exciting. I think we can get to do cool stuff like that. But yeah, forcing somebody to good for sysops. If you're suddenly getting hacked yourself, like your rig is getting hacked, and you can just suddenly, say, bye-bye, unless they're making a check, which is a daunting check. So good luck with that. And of course, if you're getting attacked by AI, yeah, good luck. Mike, what was your favourite?
Well, me as a person, I have a talent called decisiveness, so I was able to pick one talent as my favorite. Yep, that was special. That was special use permit. Right. Now it's not that flashy in terms of what it does, but I do love it because it sort of helps solidify the fact that you just can't walk around with a firearm in the setting, not in the upper city anyway. Because just like in the real world, if you walk down the street with an AK-47 over slung over your shoulder, people are going to question that. Probably the authorities. So this talent's great because it sort of blends the whole like a personal thing and something that you carry and on your person is this license.
Yep.
So it gets rid of the whole like micromanaging credits and stuff like that to buy a license.
Yep.
Use this talent and you just off camera acquire a license.
Yeah.
And it's really, really cool. I love it. And it also makes restricted firearms accessible for your character. And you can carry firearms on the street and not be you can be questioned by authorities if you can present this license. But I do love how the talent specifies that you still can't use this firearm for nefarious purposes because that will be questioned. So it doesn't give you a license to kill, which is great.
Doesn't make it 007.
That's right, and it's very, very useful for anyone who's a weapon dude in your game. Yeah. It's a must-have talent. Otherwise,
because you want to be able to carry your gun around. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's also a good tip for the GMs out there. If you're running an Android game and your players are running around Rambo of guns, you may want to actively enforce that's not okay. Because if you don't do that, it sort of devalues this talent.
Well, the best thing to do there, in my opinion, is they get into a fight with the mafia and they start slinging these guns around and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, the cops are behind them, hitting them from the other side because they're...
And it's a crossfire.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the cops show up. They don't know who's who.
Yeah. Just wipe them all out and then ask questions.
Yeah.
Love it. So, Flano, what was your favourite talent?
Well, I sort of mentioned before that my favorite is any of the talents that really have to do with the favors system, because I absolutely love that. But particularly my favorite, if I have to pick one, is you owe me one.
Right.
Because like that is the quintessential one of these talents, right? Like it gives you an average favor, I think that is what it's called. Yeah. And you can just suddenly you have that with someone in the scene.
Yeah.
And it really helps portray that social character that knows everyone, has an in, with everything. And it simplifies things because you don't really have to make a check unless you want to say maybe try and turn that average favor into a major favor using the other rules in the book.
Yeah.
But you can, it simplifies play.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And it also helps establish that everyone is connected in this setting.
Exactly.
So you can quickly jump on the net and FaceTime your pal and go, hey, dude, remember that favor you owe me? And within 2 seconds, without derailing the game, you've got that favor granted or whatever you need to use it for. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Very good.
Another question from Facebook from Larry Haskell. Regarding the favor granting talents, corporate drone, Trimath contact, and etc., are these favors meant to be tracked as a part of their favor economy, or are they free, as in the PC cashing in on old favors they are owed?
Yeah, totally. It's definitely the latter. They're free favors, basically. It's representing the PC being in good graces with some people from that organization. So just those people willing to do them a solid when they come asking. And it's why something like You Owe Me One and Improved You Owe Me One is relatively rare and harder to activate because you can go up to somebody who you used to work with and say, hey, can you grab me some office supplies tomorrow? I need some paper to print off something. And somebody's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. But you go up to them and say, hey, I need you to kill this guy. And they're going to be like, whoa.
That escalated quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I like you, but...
Yeah. So, yeah, no, but they're free. And, yeah, I think it would definitely devalue the talent a little bit if you had to start tracking them.
Yeah, and it becomes a nightmare for the GM too, having to track all that every 2 seconds it occurs.
But I mean, if you've got talents like that do pop up, There's nothing to say that you, as a GM, that you can't record that that's occurred, that you can then use that for story fodder later on down the track. Absolutely.
However,
for sure. Yeah, if you keep going to the same person over and over with your human member talent saying, hey, can I borrow this? Hey, can I borrow this? Hey, can I borrow this? Like, it would totally be reasonable, like, 5 sessions in for the GM to be like, hey, that guy, he's come by. He wants to borrow something of yours now.
You've still got my stapler. Can I have it back?
Right.
Oh, dear. All right, so speaking of factions, from page 51, under step 6 of the character generation chapter, Shadows of the Beanstalk introduces us to a new mechanic for the GeneSys system, namely favors and factions. Now, the origin of these rules can obviously be traced back to the obligation mechanic in Star Wars Edge of the Empire, but this system has a few distinct differences. Now, we've had a couple of questions about this, so Flano, would you like to take us through the first one?
We've got a question here from GM Phil.
From that other podcast?
Yes, that other one that we shall not name.
I haven't listened to it.
Nobody listens to it. No.
But he asks, factions and favors, how do you see them being used in other settings?
I mean, I think you could basically take that system into any setting that has a bunch of strong semi-independent factions in it, which could be a lot of settings, really. The only trick is you need to figure out what those factions are, and there needs to be a decent number of them. It doesn't work if it's like, just like 2 or 3 major groups so much. You want there to be a lot of different groups. And so you need to figure out what those factions are going to be, and then figure out what kinds of things those factions can do that the other factions couldn't. Because I think one of the things that helps make the favor system work is that when you start getting into specific organizations, we talk about some of the specific things those organizations can do that other organizations maybe can't do or are less willing to do. And I think you need that extra element of detail for interest and sort of for, I mean, like we have our generic favor type table as well. But if that's the only thing you were going off of, I think the system would be a lot less interesting. So, that's basically all you would have to do. All that.
Because Phil's not into doing lots of extra work on stuff at all. So,
so I don't know how he'd handle it.
No, personally, though, I could absolutely see this working in Star Wars.
You've
got a lot of factions floating around there, and people owing things to people. As seen by obligation. I think this would work well there.
And if you wanted to, even if you wanted to remove obligation from the equation completely and use the favor system, I think it imports it straight across really well.
You totally could.
Indeed. All right. So now we get into a really big section, which I thoroughly enjoyed going through, which is equipment and vehicles. So what was your favorite piece of equipment, Sam?
I'm going to say the Chrome Crushers because it's a bunch of piston-augmented boxing gloves. So, basically winning.
Linked one melee weapon is beautiful.
That's just disturbing.
You got to wear them both, though. That's the only way.
So what about you, Huzz? What was your favorite piece of equipment in the book?
Well, it's an armor upgrade. Attachment, rather than it's still equipment, I guess. Cool. It's the jump jets. Mainly because it's the most beautiful and elegant way to handle some sort of rocket pack jump jetting system ever, compared to the notorious, much exhausting jetpacks from Star Wars. I think it's great. For one round per combat, you can fly.
Yeah,
simple as that. No, you are treated as a silhouette one vehicle or anything like that. It's super simple and it works. I think it's great. And it's very, very themey too. And who doesn't want a rocket pack of some variety?
Also, you don't suffer damage from falling, so you can do your orbital drop deployment.
That's a good point.
High altitude.
Or boarding actions.
Maybe not orbital.
Boarding actions. God, you people actions. In boarding actions. God.
They're effective.
Wow. Welcome to my pain, Sam, when in Star Wars, but they just want to board action everything. Anyway.
Make ships, not paper. That's
you remember that Star Destroyer, right?
Yep.
It's like I'm sick.
Hey, I once spent a year playing in, I think it was it was Max's game, where my character's whole plan was to ram our spaceship as much as possible. So,
yep.
Nice.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
What about you, Flano? What was your favourite piece of gear?
All of it. But
How do you talk about me not making a decision? Jeez.
I'm surrounded by it.
there's a lot of things in the book that are great, like the Gauss rifles and things like that, or things that reinforce the setting. Personally, my favorite of those would probably be the spinal modem.
Right.
Mm.
All right. It's written in the book as like a piece of outdated equipment, but it has a place. You know, like who doesn't want a computer embedded in their body that allows them to access the internet whenever they want? Like, there's been entire stories written about this sort of thing, and I think it's great to have that there.
Mm. One of the things that I've been a big fan of net running since Shadowrun. That was the actually before Shadowrun with Cyberpunk 2020, the RPG. That I've been in love. I think I fell in love with all of the net gear which is in the book. But my favourite's always going to be the big rig. I just love that whole scene of you guys go out and do your the running. I'm just going to sit here and be God. But basically, with all of your gear and
the
stuff.
problem is when they trace you and come knocking.
Yeah, well,
all of your
that's a
friends elsewhere.
That's a problem.
No, they're not there.
That's
Well,
why.
and then at that point, you have people asking whether Wizard survived the.
Yeah. But
Alrighty.
I just love the big rig.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that Zaysoft?
Zaysoft. Yes.
Okay. So, another question from the FFG forums. Zaysoft asks, several weapons in Shadow of the Beanstalk have an item quality of a limited ammo, but there is no spare clip item available in the book. Is it assumed to be simply by using this? Sorry, is it assumed to be simply by using the spare clip item from the core? Now, I'm assuming he's meaning
The core rule.
the core rulebook. Yep. To use the item from there. Also, missile launchers are all limited ammunition, but do not have a price listed to restock them. What is that price, and do they have the same rarity as the weapon?
Yes. So yeah, that was the missile launches, especially, was a little oversight on our part, and so I apologize for that. As far as the spare clip, you should absolutely just use that. It's super integral to pretty much most of the GeneSys settings we do. So yes, you should absolutely use it. It'll work the same in this setting. But for the missiles, we feel that micro missiles should cost about 100 credits a missile, and the missile launcher should cost 1,000 credits for a missile. And the rarity should be the same, because let's be honest, when you're buying missiles, the launcher is almost sometimes a secondary element to the missile itself. So for a full reload of micro missiles, you would need 300 credits per volley. And then, yeah, like I said, the missile launcher, you need at least 1,000 credits to reload that sucker.
Yep. Cool.
To go back on the point regarding the reload pack from the core rulebook, I don't think Android even has painkillers listed in its gear section, I believe. There's no quick look now. So that's another good example of using the core rulebook to get a basic item.
Yeah.
So that's not listed in
They
Android.
are supposed to work in conjunction with each other.
And that's an important thing people need to remember, that both are in.
Is that meant to be?
I was going to say, technically, we do have the slap patch, which is their version of the painkiller.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
That was definitely, I think it was definitely one of those cases where there was some question about like how much stuff do we list, and for completion's sake, we should have listed the extra reload, and that was an oversight on our part. But luckily, anyone who's playing Shadow of the Beanstalk should have a copy of the core book as well.
If they don't,
Probably.
why?
Yeah.
So
They're going to find it difficult.
yeah, they're going to find it difficult. That's right.
So, We have a question here from the FFG forums by Claude. The shortened barrel attachment in table 2-8 lists a price of 180. In the detailed entry, however, it says cost 250. Kind of weird as no other attachments have a cost listed in their entry. Which one is correct?
The table is correct. We forgot to remove that entry, so that's one more typo that we'll have to clean up.
Oh, these are things that happen, especially with a big book like this.
When you're talking about how many words would it be for the entire book?
About 7.
About 7. What?
Just ignore Huzz.
Just ignore Huzz, yes.
It's probably between 180 and 200,000.
Oh, that's a lot of words. Trying to do that by yourself, it's no wonder you've got 50 million writers. Anyway,
but yes, we should have caught and erased that.
Yeah.
So
all good.
That'll probably be fixed on a reprint.
Cool. And some of the changes that because on the FFG forums, people have raised some issues already, and they've already been picked up in the PDF, which is now available for everybody on Drive-Thru RPG as well. So.
Yes, our first round of fixes we were able to address them in the PDF because of the delay between the PDF release and the core book release.
Yeah.
Once we have a pretty firm idea on things that need to be corrected, we'll also, of course, release an updated errata for that for those of you who have a printed copy and need to check on things.
Cool. All right, so armor. There is a fairly long question from Ken Tripped, and it is huge.
You want to give it the summary version?
Well, this is the summary version.
This is the summary version. The question was
yes.
It went for about 4 parts. So
Ken Tripped was a fan of multiple choice. I think he read a lot of Choose Your Own Adventures. This was a big question.
So this is a shortened version. So is the exosuit listed on page 94 in the equipment chapter the same as the suit listed on page 232 under the adversary entry for the SXC, I have to say that slowly, exosuit pilot? Both have slightly different stats, since the suit under the pilot has a defensive 1, soak 3, +1 brawn, and +5 wound threshold, and allows the wearer to operate underwater and in space, while the suit in the equipment chapter has 0 defense, 3 soak, +1 brawn, wound threshold of +4, additional sensors, and allows the wearer to operate underwater and in space. The image on page 94 has the same name as the armor listed as the NPC stat block on page 232, minus the little a, but the write-up doesn't mention that suit specifically. Additionally, for the extra defense, I need to take a big deep breath with this question. Additionally, for the extra defense, how much should I increase the cost? Also, about the exosuit fists, which are in the suit, are under the adversary on page 232. That item has the knockdown quality, while the chrome crushers on page 91 has linked 1. Are they the same or are they different items? Go.
First of all, exosuit fists and chrome crushers are not the same item.
Right.
So an exosuit actually is closer to a power gauntlet in weapons, but they're not the same.
Right.
You could put a power gauntlet on an exosuit or be using a power gauntlet while wearing one, but yeah, think more in that direction. But no, chrome crushers, exosuit, not the same thing. Second, he did in fact catch the answer to the question. Well, they caught the answer to their question, which is that the Delta Arms X1 is different than the Delta Arms XF X1A. So yes, it is actually, and I'm not just making this up, we actually did do the XSC exosuit pilot in a newer model of exosuit than the one you can buy.
Right.
And with the difference of with the added difference of +1 defense.
Yeah.
So to the final part of the question, how would you make an XF? Jeez, I'm dying.
You see what I mean?
X1.A suit, the next model. Actually, we have a system for that. In GeneSys, there's an item construction system. Talks about costs for defense and armor.
Yep.
If I flip open to that, if you're combining a high value with a low value, so normally +1 defense is 50. But since you already have +3 soak, which is a pretty high value of soak, we suggest you increase the cost by between 250 to 500. I would recommend airing high on that and increasing the cost of that exosuit, that the X1.A exosuit that you have created, by at least another 500, maybe 550.
Yep.
There you go. So, yeah.
And I believe you can... Sorry, Sam.
Oh, and I was just saying, as always, a disclaimer when you're creating items and creating anything for yourself, don't be afraid to to tweak those costs or tweak those elements based on your own experiences at the table, because every game player group's going to do it different. So if you make your new exosuit and all your players rush out and buy one and you realize it was too cheap, then you probably need to up the cost some more.
And to further add to that, the exact same defense increase can be gained just by buying the ballistic plates item attachment for the armor. It gives you 1 extra defense and it's 350 credits. So it's almost spot on to how GeneSys core book recommends.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And the other thing as well is that the equipment which is in the under the adversary section doesn't list hard points.
No,
just saying.
It does not.
Where the equipment actually under the equipment section lists hard points. So there's nothing to say that the upgraded model has less hard points. So.
And actually, that's Delta Arms' little dirty secret, is the military version of their exosuit that they sold to the SXC. They just bolted aftermarket armor panels onto it and charged the U.S. government 10 times as much.
Nice.
Sounds accurate.
It sounds accurate. Yeah.
But I think that's a fairly good rule of thumb, though. Like, I wouldn't take, Sam could correct me on this, but I wouldn't take every single adversary or NPC entry to be 1-for-1 in terms of gear and etc., because they are supposed to be different, and there is a lot more gear in the world than what's represented in the armory. So if you do find something that doesn't match up to something you find in the gear section, create it, add it in at a cost. Simple as that.
That's right.
No, and that's absolutely true. And honestly, it's kind of like something that I would encourage you to do. Look at some of the weird stuff that some of those adversaries have, and then figure out how you would build it for yourself.
Alrighty, so the next question comes from Chase Lamaster. That's Caitlin's partner. He asks, the spinal modem says that it acts as a BMI, but it says the runner can go deep as a maneuver in its description. However, in the BMI description, it says a runner can go deep as an incidental. Is this a typo?
It is a typo. You should go deep as a maneuver. That's a relic of trying a few different options and realizing that going deep as an incidental was probably just a little too good.
That's a simple one.
Indeed.
So we've got a question here by Sean Cardell. I'm trying to sort out icebreakers, hardware and running. I'm getting hung up on the use of the word active. Page 98 says the big rig may have 4 icebreakers active on its system at once, 2 for a portable rig, 1 for a pad. But page 132 says if a runner activates an icebreaker, all other icebreakers automatically deactivate. Is active being used loosely here? Does it really mean installed regarding hardware?
Yeah, and that's a reasonable question. And I apologize for the confusion. So what's going on is that some abilities and talents, such as like the Codeslinger talent, let you have multiple icebreakers actually like active at once. And at the same time, we do talk about computers basically being able to store a lot of stuff in memory. So like you can keep an icebreaker, basically tucked away in the memory of your computer, in the deep storage of your computer, but you can't easily access it or run it. It's not installed necessarily. It's just, the files are just sitting there. So the idea is that the rigs, what they're saying is this is how many icebreakers or pieces of ice you can have on running on the system, but the runner can, or like you could have. Yeah, I realize that active is confusing. So so the big rig and the portable rig, they have that hard cap on the total number of icebreakers, but most characters can only have one active at once because the rules provide that limiter. Now there's some things that let you have multiple icebreakers active at once, such as Code Slinger. So you basically can think of the big rigs limiter as basically being how many can we have installed? How many icebreakers can I have waiting for me to use, and I spend a maneuver to deactivate one and switch over to my Gordian blade from my corroder because I think I'm going to encounter some code gates. So it's like it's your weapons that you have on your person you can switch between, basically.
That's how I like to think of it.
Yeah, because that's certainly how, when we were playtesting, because I was doing I was playing the main runner while Huzz was running it, and that's how I thought about it, because I sort of was trying to get my head around it as well, is that if you've to have the stuff on your rig that you're not actually currently using, that's like everything's holstered. And then that additional talent basically allows you to dual wield, for want of a better term. So you can have two weapons out at the same time. But normally, it's just one weapon only, and then you can put that away and pull out another weapon. Yeah, same sort of thing for ice.
So long as that weapon's installed on your holster, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. That's your encumbrance limit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it. And then if you have something, the whole like keeping things in like deep memory and stuff is more of a hand wave to, we realize computers have a lot of storage power in this setting, and you can there's probably a lot of stuff tucked away on your computer. But a good way of thinking of anything that isn't installed and installed on your system is it's back home in a box with a lock on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, you can, like, in modern day, you can have a program on your computer that's not installed. You can't easily access it and run it. No. But it's there.
Well, look at any PlayStation. You might have some software installed, but, you've got a game that you play, but you haven't played it for a while. You've still got access to it.
Got to update it.
Or my Steam account, for that matter. Games that I own that I don't have installed and don't play.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yes, the cloud's a good example. Like you could have that. You could have that ice stashed on a private cloud network. To put it in comparison to what we know now. Yep. So to get a new piece of ice onto your rig, you have to spend the time downloading and installing it. And that's not something you can actively do quickly in a combat. Well, in a run, I should say. You could try, but good luck.
Indeed.
You'll be dead before it's done.
Yeah. Indeed. All right, so talking about cybernetics and Gmods, but we won't, but we're going to. So cybernetics and Gmods. Jeremy Thompson asks via Facebook, not sure if I've missed this in the book, but can you use both Gmods and cybernetics together? This seems overpowered. What are your thoughts on the balance factor either way?
Reasonable question, but I actually don't think it is too overpowered, and you can use them together. They do different things, basically. And that's kind of deliberate, right? Like, it makes them feel different, but also they don't step on each other's toes. So cybernetics are almost all passive buffs. They increase stats or give you the ability to do things you don't normally do, but it's a passive thing. It isn't something you necessarily switch on and off. Whereas Gmods are almost all, not all, but almost all active. you deliberately choose to trigger them to get a bonus. Now, the thing about both cybernetics and Gmods, and we definitely did this deliberately, is that having them affects your strain resource. Cybernetics cut down on your strain threshold, and whereas Gmods require you to spend strain to use them. And so if you do use both, you're cutting down on your strain threshold to get access to the cybernetics that give you the bonus, and you are also losing strain every time you trigger that Gmod. And since you cannot be a cyborg archetype and a Gmod archetype, the cyborg doesn't, like, you can't benefit from the cyborg's free cybernetic, but also get like the Gmod special abilities and the free Gmod and stuff. So fine. And of course, finally, there are the checks for installing Gmods, which are, I think, sometimes get overlooked, but nine times out of 10, it's probably fine. And we obviously want that to be the case most of the time, because we don't want it to unduly penalize somebody for getting a sweet Gmod. But there's always that chance that something's going to go wrong with them.
Yeah.
So, and if it goes really, really wrong, it can even be even worse. So all of those elements mean that if your character wants to go all in on cybernetics and Gmods, they're gonna have a really low strain threshold and going to be very glass cannony. They'll be able to do a lot of stuff for a couple rounds, and then they are going to be running really close to being incapacitated, passing out, or otherwise being eliminated due to their exceeding their strength threshold.
Not to mention, they're going to need to have deep wallets to afford all that.
Yes.
Or a lot of favors.
That's the other element too, for sure. And we talk about in there that, like, cybernetics and Gmods do not make a cyborg or a Gmod. It's the idea that Gmod archetypes are super into their Gmods, are more accustomed to them, have potentially been Gmodded from birth, in vitro. Cyborgs, the same thing. Like, I lost my arm in the war, and I've had this arm forever, and I'm back into it. I can compensate for having this piece of metal on me. All that stuff.
Yeah.
Not to mention the idea of a Gmod and cybernetic person combined is very, very cool. Like, aesthetically, that's awesome. And that's great.
You're not human anymore.
No. Well, you are. Well, aren't you? Morality play.
Yes.
Right now.
Very good.
It's a classic. All right. Speaking of Gmods and cybernetics, however, in the core rules, it mentions that there is a soft cap of 5 on all attributes. Page 15's sidebar. And cybernetics can never give anything more than a single +1 to an attribute. Additionally, the dedication talent can never take the attribute above 5. We know that this is an Android Q&A, but can some clarification be given about what the developer sees a hard and a soft cap for all attributes?
Yeah, that's fair. Since we do call it out as a soft cap, we understand that some things can take above 5, and like if you run the overcharged talent, potentially even above 6. 5 is a good cap for most things. I mean, including dedication. Like, there really shouldn't be any talents that buy you above 5 for your characteristics. Cybernetics increasing you to 6, we think, is a good soft cap for cybernetics. Going up to 7 with a talent temporarily, that's fine. That's overcharge is a difficult tier 4 talent, and you need to perform a check just to increase that bonus. So
that's a lot of XP.
Yes, it's a lot of XP. But yeah, it all comes down to, that's why we consider it a soft quote unquote cap, because we accept that in some situations you are going to increase above 5, and cybernetics can certainly do that. We just recommend that, especially when you're building your own settings, we wanted to make it clear that you shouldn't just think of characteristics as, oh, I'm just going to throw any number out there that I feel like. Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 50. Don't go crazy with it. And a lot of that is less about. The game engine starts to strain a bit at really high dice pool numbers, but it's actually more than the game engine. It's more about. When you start doing these really huge dice pools all the time, we just feel like that can be frustrating for the players to have to track all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, long and short of it, it's a soft cap. Cybernetics can bring it up to 6, and talents can boost those cybernetics up to 7.
Right.
Probably best to keep within those limits if you're looking for my recommendation.
Cool. Very good.
From the forums, we've got another question by Noah Jam. He asks, the base book didn't have any mention of purely cosmetic cybernetics or Gmods. Any suggestion for the costs on something like that within the setting?
Yeah, that's fair. I'd recommend for cosmetic cybernetics, follow the same approach as for replacement cybernetics, because that's basically what you're doing. And that you can find on page 104 in the replacements and improvement sidebar. It basically says that if you're trying to replace a damaged or lost limb or eye or organ, you use something that's half the cost and it doesn't change the effect. If it's just a replacement arm and it's not a boosted cyber arm, you no longer have to worry about being one-armed, but nothing about your stats change besides your strength threshold going down for having the cybernetic. And it costs half as much. If you want a fancy, pretty arm for whatever reason, same sort of thing, right? A cosmetic is basically a replacement. Yep. And Gmods, that'd be about the same thing. Now, with Gmods are a little more interesting in their own way, because Gmods themselves aren't really replacement organs or anything, as much as there's something that changes the genetic structure of your body and causes them to grow different. So for cosmetic Gmods, I would just recommend taking things like probably chameleon skin if you're changing like skin color or like growing tattoos on you. There's a follicle control for like hair. Take some of those cosmetic appearances, maybe geno-sculpted physique. Again, remove the bonus, the actual thing it can do. Mechanically, just say, this has changed my appearance, and divide the cost of the Gmod by half.
Right.
And you still have to install it, though. You could still have a horrible mutation rejection because you wanted skin that had like an anarchy symbol all over it.
Ugh.
And instead you get lizard skin.
No, you get Wayland Corporation logos everywhere.
Yeah.
That's very good. All right, so ships and vehicles. We've only got one real question with regards to that. So it comes from Soulcast77 on the FFG forums. I'm a bit of a vehicle maniac. That's the word I was looking for. So my first thing has been to compare the Space Superiority Fighter with an X-Wing from the Star Wars RPG. While the stats are comparable, weapons are clearly on a different range. GeneSys-based starfighter weapons deal much less damage, while all other equipment is comparable, even armor. Vehicle damage is slightly lower. Is this something that you do with rebalancing of the vehicle combat in GeneSys?
So GeneSys, I think, and we've talked about this before when we've talked about just GeneSys in general, but it did provide us a chance to review the narrative dice system and really come up with a new approach to some things, and generally start fresh in some ways. So, to answer your question, we felt that for especially what we wanted to do with vehicles in Shadow the Beanstalk, that we wanted lower damage vehicles to have a little more survivability, last a little bit longer, and So we took this opportunity to balance them out in that regard. Now, so yeah, that's basically it.
Cool. So the answer is yes. Basically, yes. Right. Excellent. Well, that was the only vehicle question we had. So, I would have to say my favourite vehicle, if I was asked, would have to be the flying motorbike. What is it called? The something hopper. I can't remember what it's called. Hopper bike. Yes, that was it. So yeah, no, absolutely love the vehicle section. It's very, very cool. I know that there was somebody. Like a motorcycle. Well, exactly. Somebody mentioned that there was no motorbike. I think it was actually from our own group that there was no motorbike listed. But I mean, it's not hard to extrapolate that.
Yeah, change maneuvering type from hovering to wheeled,
and you're done.
Yeah.
So
pretty much you can take. We didn't want to put in a ton of ground vehicles anyway. Ground vehicles aren't a huge part of New Angeles, whereas hoppers definitely are. So we basically just have the two ground vehicles for comparison.
Yeah,
because New Angeles is the city of flying vehicles, more or less.
And it's a vertical city, right? So you're not gonna get around very well on a land vehicle.
No.
Now, if you do want a motorbike which has wheels, there's no reason why a hopper couldn't have both.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose
because wheels has the cool factor. You see, you got to maintain that cool factor.
We were talking about using Blade Runner's inspiration, so I guess I can't argue with hoppers having wheels.
Exactly. Yeah,
alrighty. Cool. So, regarding the network, a fairly extensive part of the Shadow of the Beanstalk, it's fair to say.
It's amazing.
Via Facebook, Kyle Quigley asks, what was the inspiration for the hacking rules?
Yeah. So for hacking, we wanted to feel you had to be interacting with ice and icebreakers. We also wanted to feel more like movie hacking than real life hacking, which I am given to understand through some research is incredibly boring for the most part. And we also wanted to maintain the core of the basic rules that we'd start out with in GeneSys, but then expand on them to really build up that idea with hacking. And then finally, we wanted people, when they go into doing a network encounter, to feel like what they do in any combat encounter, structured encounter, has some crossover. So that's why, in the end, icebreakers have a strength. Ice has a strength. You're comparing those two. You're trying to exceed it. In some ways, very similar to I shoot you with my gun. Does my damage exceed your soak?
Yep.
So yeah, we wanted that crossover so that people didn't feel like they had to learn something completely new when they started it.
It's true. And I think Huzz mentioned it in the last episode as well, that both systems work when you're in real life combat versus the net. They work together as far as so you can actually be running both of those types of encounters. So the net runner is not wasting any of their talents or skills or whatever else. And the other PCs are doing what they love, and they can link into the story. And I know that Huzz has done that quite successfully when we've been playing, which is cool.
Just to be mindful of it.
Yep,
just have to be mindful. Yeah, absolutely.
But the important thing to remember is that run network encounters and combat encounters and even structured social encounters are all structured encounters.
Yep.
They all follow the action, maneuver, that kind of limitation. And so you can do meat space and network stuff at the same time. Just follow your initiative order.
Yep, exactly.
So we've got a question here from Christopher Hickman via Facebook. Is there a way to create your own ice and icebreakers detailed in the book? If not, is that a thing we can expect at some point?
Yeah, so I can't really talk about, of course, things that haven't been announced.
Yep.
So can't say one way or the other on the expectations. There is not a way to create your own ice at this point. I would say if you want to create your own ice and icebreakers, I think a good place to start is obviously look at what we've already created. They have icebreakers have ice, three basic forms, and they all have the same basic function. A barrier is going to stop you from going into a subserver. A sentry is going to alert people that you're there, and a code gate is going to kick you out of the system. Start with that. Pick some strengths. Don't worry too much about pricing. You can sort of test that out, but you can also use existing ice to determine price. Your strengths probably want to be a couple higher than this, like 1 to 2 higher than the strengths of most of your icebreakers. But remember, icebreakers have to exceed it, the strength of the ice. So you don't want it to be super high, and you still have to succeed on the check as well. So I'd say that's a good guidance for ice as you're creating it. And for icebreakers, you need to figure out what kind of ice your breakers can break. The more types of ice your breakers can break, the better it is. And it should either have drawbacks, like Crypsis, you have to spend a maneuver basically resetting the virus before it goes in, but it can work against everything. And then you have things like the Gordian Blade, which is really good, but only against code gates. So don't make the mistake of making the ultimate icebreaker super cheap, super good, because that takes away a lot of the interest of the guessing game between what kind of ice are you going to run into.
True. Because one of the things that I mentioned in the last episode as well is that you can kind of, and tell me whether this is sort of not a good idea or not, but with Terranoth, you've obviously got the crafting rules for alchemy. Yeah. Where I guess if you are just wanting to create programs that are already in existence, rather than having to, necessarily, you'd obviously have to buy some software, but you may not necessarily have to pay all of the software and you just build the rest. So you could use those crafting rules to do that. Would that be fair?
I think you could at least use them as a starting point. Some of the extra effects are not going to really be appropriate, but some of them certainly would. And if you're crafting your own ice, probably want to use computer sysops. Maybe you need to make a knowledge, the net check to gather like basically the programming code that you would need. I think those could be good starting points for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Now, Jason Brown basically asks, any advice for what information is made vulnerable when your rig has been breached? Does it depend on what tech that you have?
That's a good question. My guiding point for that is think about all the information you have on your smartphone and then assume it's worse. Like assume there's even more information than that on your pad or your rig. Because the world of Android's super tech heavy. People have to work very hard to keep their tech scrubbed of any personal information because it's all big data. Like everything's working to gather as much information about you as possible. So, credit accounts, personal details, current location, access to your access to cameras and microphones, passwords to social media. A lot of it's fair game. I mean, GMs could give players a chance to say like, no, this is my running rig. It is super clean. But make them work for it. Make them maybe make some sysops checks or other checks to try and clean out their computers, that kind of thing. And generally assume that if they just have one computer, if they don't have a like running computer and then a computer I use for everyday life, then that computer is going to have personal information on it. There's probably no way around it to interact with the Android setting. One thing to note though, when somebody gets onto your rig, they're just not going to get all that information immediately. It's not going to happen right away. They're going to have to spend some enact command maneuvers to like sift through that data, to download that data. Basically, if somebody hacks you or makes a run on you, you should have some time. The full amount is probably up to your GM, but you should have some time to kick them out or to try and go for the hard shutdown and escape them.
And that's when snare talent comes in handy.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
yes, it is.
You can basically set up your own system with you as the sysop. So
Yeah.
if you set it up right.
Exactly.
Now, via Facebook, Jeremy Thompson asks, there doesn't seem to be any content on computer viruses. I'd love to hear any and all thoughts on how they feel, how Sam would feel they would work, how we could potentially work those into the game with what is presented here, possible pitfalls we might avoid in terms of game balance, possible ideas for how to avoid viruses, and maybe why they didn't include any of that in the game.
Why does that sound like an entire show topic?
Yeah, it kind of does.
Yeah.
I'll give you but I can take a stab at that. So
Sure.
having this, thinking about it a little bit, with the network encounter rules and the setting, some of that element is a little too broad to take into account viruses. So, for example, some of the icebreakers might be thematically viruses, such as Crypsis, I believe, is technically a virus program that sneaks its way in past something. Corroder might be another good example of that. And honestly, the infamous Sagittarius A star might actually be, is I think a great example of a virus. So some of your icebreakers probably work off of the concept of a computer virus. Now, you could probably do more. You certainly could explore doing more with viruses. But maybe I might suggest, instead of focusing on this is what viruses do, because they do a lot of different stuff, even in modern day, who knows what they'll do in the future. Maybe focus more on coming up with either icebreakers or other types of programs that do things in the network that, and then saying that sounds like something that works because it's a virus. So maybe you have because you have a command that lets you destroy systems with the burn system command. Maybe you have a virus that when you introduce it, it makes doing the burn system command easier. Or maybe it even has its own little computer hacking skill, and it's constantly making tests to try and burn the system, but it's not very good at it. You can go pretty nuts if you want.
I guess
I would say, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it almost works like a minion, almost. Well, do something like that.
Yeah, you could. Maybe you could do that. There's also AIs in this setting. We didn't get too much, which is something else we didn't get into. But you could make AIs that can help you out as well. But yeah, I would say don't assume that you're going to come up with rules for just this is what viruses do. Yeah. Instead, play around with this is something I want to do with network rules and I think that this particular thing, this program, this minion AI, this extra runner that backs me up, I think that's well represented as a virus in this particular case.
Yep.
I'd like to point out as well, with viruses in the real world, and anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but they're all written by someone. They are essentially icebreakers. They're all written with a purpose, whether that's burning a system or stealing information from people. This is that's what they are. They don't come about like the common cold.
They're all opposed checks, really.
Yeah, someone has written this for a purpose to steal your information or destroy your system or to rob you with the programs that shut down your computer unless you pay them money. And that's a real thing in the real world.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
I get calls at work about that all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, side note. All right, so we've talked. I think that's the short version. Thank you for that, Sam. I know that we can, as I said, that could be an entire topic alone about how to run encounters, and I think we will definitely be doing that at some point. Is talking about how to do. How to create viruses, how to create our AIs and things like that. But,
the network's its own topic.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge topic, but a fun one when we do it.
Yep.
So, yeah. So, now, talking about adversaries.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got a good question here by Darth Zorg. page 171 of the Shadow of the Beanstalk, the Caprice Nisei Nemesis clone with her precognition or psychic abilities, which are amazing. However, in my search of the book, I'm unable to find abilities or talents that correlate to something similar that a player or even another adversary could take. There are the psionics listed in the Twilight Imperium setting on page 182, but did I miss it in this book, or is this an ability that is exclusively for NPCs? How would you go about adding this to an Android game?
I don't know what I'm talking about.
So it's a super interesting question, and this actually goes into the lore of the setting. It's a conversation I had with Dan and Andrew Navarro, our head of our studio, talking about like we know psychic abilities may exist in Android, and I say may for a reason, because there's some question as to how these work. Are they really like mental powers? But we know they exist, but we also know they are super limited. And when I say super limited, I mean, I can count the number of characters who have these psychic or psionic abilities on one hand. It's Caprice Nisei, her sister, I think it's Akiko, and then there's one other potentially. And then the other Nisei clones are all in tanks. Like they are not up and walking around. So basically so there's maybe 4 or 5 more, and maybe none of them are awakened. And everyone was very clear that psychic powers are not a thing that exist, that people can get or they come across them. People aren't going to believe in them either. They're not, they may not even actually be psychic powers. It may just be an incredibly fast thinking combined with this mental ability to like predict what's going to happen next, to really read body language, so that you can basically read someone's mind by reading all of their subliminal physical cues. And it only exists in the Nisei line. Hard stop. That was and something that the creators of the setting are very clear on. It is just the Nisei clones. So with that, it was like, well, yeah, that's not something that the players are going to use on their own. It certainly is something that they could run into if you really want to go into that, like really interesting, like, it's something we wanted to have because you could run into Caprice Nisei and it could be frankly a terrifying experience for you.
I'm sure it will.
Or one of her maybe 2 sisters, and that might be even worse. But we knew that it wasn't something we wanted players to play because of the setting limitations. It's also worth pointing out that it's not psionics in the traditional sense, even if it is psionics. It is just the ability to be somewhat precognitive and to read people. So you're not like going in and like mentally manipulating people. You're not like telekinesising things. That doesn't exist. And that's why psionics may not even be a thing in this setting. We want that element. We want that to be sort of a question mark, because we also want this. We want to maintain this idea that this is relatively like hard science based. And so to say like, oh yeah, but there's also psychics, that kind of takes people out of that immersion, because it's, psychics are basically magic, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I really like the fact that it's been kept almost essentially out of the book completely, because on the one character, because it makes it special, and nothing makes something special mundane is when everyone has access to it.
Yeah,
and every single character is running around with psionics. It sort of takes away what makes psionics special in this setting. It's supposed to be this hyper rare thing, to the point where no one would ever believe you ever if you tried to say it or mention it anyway.
No.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to have something like that in your setting anyway, well, you've got magic rules from the core that you can use. So, you know, there's a whole heap of other things. And I mean, it's to take it away from Shadow of the Beanstalk for just a moment, one of the questions was raised when I was talking about doing my Marvel setting is that if you've got somebody like Spider-Man, you know, who has like almost this precog ability, how do you represent that? Well, Chris Witt, GM Chris from Order 66, basically just said to me, isn't that represented by a really high vigilance skill anyway?
Yep.
You know, it what it looks like in game doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be a whole rule set that is designed. It can just be, this is how that is explained away.
Yep.
So, yeah, don't overthink it, I guess.
Yeah. I got asked today, in a different conversation, how do you stat out a character that has a lot of abilities or maybe has a lot of backgrounds and like that has a lot of history behind them? People have very deep feelings about how that character is supposed to be portrayed. And for me, the answer is you don't make the mistake of assuming you have to put everything in the mechanics.
Yep.
You have to find the thing that is the most important and you stat that, like the most iconic, and then assume a lot of that's just the rest of that's just going to come narratively. If it's Spider-Man, he better be able to shoot webs out of his hands somehow, and he better be able to climb up walls and swing from walls and swing from webs.
Yeah.
Everything else, you can probably just roll with.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that sort of rule of thumb, I guess, would apply with what you guys did with Dawn of Rebellion, where all of the main named NPCs that we sort of see in the films and whatever else, they don't have this monstrous list of abilities. They've just got a one core thing that sort of suits them better, which sort of can incorporate a whole heap of things. But I think it works out better that way. Yeah. Final question. Huzz.
Alrighty. Okay, Shadow of the Beanstalk offers a lot of named NPC characters from the Android lore. Was it a conscious decision from the start to include all those big personalities as potential NPCs for players to interact with?
You know, pretty early on, we decided we wanted to do that for sure. It's just because a lot of these characters have been around from the beginning. Floyd, Caprice, Rachel Beckman, and like they've been, you know, around since the core, since that first board game, and they're as much a part of the setting as the Beanstalk itself. We just, some of them are going to have to show up, and they can be pretty punchy, they can be pretty powerful, but there's a lot. The nice thing about Shadow of the Beanstalk is that it's not a game that necessarily has to emphasize combat quite as much as some of the other GeneSys settings you could have. And so there's a lot of ways to interact with them that doesn't necessarily involve fighting them. Yeah. And so you could run into Floyd or Caprice on as part of an NAPD investigation, or end up working with Rachel Beckman to track down a bounty hunter, or against Inez Delgado when you're trying to hack into something. Run into the NAPD database and she's trying to stop you, or vice versa. So I guess, it was a conscious decision, and it just felt like they were such a big part of the setting that we'd be fools to leave them out.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know in the upcoming game, as I mentioned at the start, I've used a named NPC because it was a conscious decision I made, because I felt initially I wasn't never going to do that, because I don't know, me as a person, as a GM, I sort of avoid using big named characters. But I feel on Android, because it is such a enclosed space in the New Angeles setting, it's quite plausible to, as you said, run across these personalities. Yeah. It's all happens in the space of within the same few years of lore. So it's running into Darth Vader is quite rare, but running into one of the many named personalities from Android is far less rarer. So
it's a small world after all.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, I just hope for you guys' sake he didn't pick Mr. Stone.
Well, I guess you'll find out.
Oh, God.
He'll neither confirm nor deny.
Oh, dear.
Just be real polite to him. Real polite.
We're doomed.
I'm polite to all of my clients. Anyway.
There you go.
Very good. Well, look, as I said, that brings us to the final question. So I think that's safe to say, Sam, you've answered more than enough. That's 8 pages worth. So I'm sure that given enough time, we could ask you about 1 million more. I'm sure that you'll more than happy to come on to the show again at a later stage. Not necessarily for this book, but for whatever is on the horizon.
Yeah, absolutely am. And it's always awesome to be on your show, guys. It's a real pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming
along. So on behalf of us, here at the Dice Pool, we thank you for spending time with us. And as always, it's been a blast. Now, normally we would answer some more listener questions, but I think 2.5 hours worth of asking questions are probably enough. So since we've spent essentially the entire episode doing that, we're going to be skipping behind the screens just for this episode. But in the meantime, don't be afraid to reach out via email, Facebook, or any of our other platforms that we are on, where you can find us and send us some questions about not just the game itself, but look, gaming generally. If you've got a GMing question or something terrible has happened at your table that you really want some advice on, let us know. I'm sure
like summoning Satan.
Like summoning Satan? Yeah, look, that's probably a bad thing. It's a bit of a game killer, really, as well as a world killer, but that's a side note.
Yeah,
maybe. Yes, anyway. So, yes. So that basically brings us to the end of another show. If you have any other questions about gaming, GMing, or just gaming in general, you can send us an email to info@thedicepoolpodcast.com, or you can post your questions to Facebook and Twitter. There are plenty of great community members who will offer you some great advice, including ourselves, and you may be lucky enough to get your question answered here on the show. Plus, you can also visit us on the web at www.thedicepoolpodcast.com.
Also, make sure to like and follow the Dice Pool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter by searching @DicePoolPodcast. We also have our community group that is filled with all your activities and work, which is amazing to see. Keep it coming.
And of course, you can find us on YouTube as well. Just look us up at the Dice Pool Podcast, or alternatively, you can find us on the Discord channel via the D20 Radio channel itself. So look us up there.
All right, guys, and that's a wrap. I'm GM Hooly.
I'm GM Huzz.
And I'm GM Flano.
And together we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a triumph away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensed swords. The content of this podcast remains a property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The GeneSys Role Playing Game, the GeneSys logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.